It might seem crazy, but week one of the NFL season is less than 3 weeks away, and the Seahawks are going to make a bit of history with their opponent, the Denver Broncos, coming to Lumen Field. We'll be breaking it all down here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening down in Sacramento, California, or overseas in London. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks have their preseason finale coming up against the Browns on Saturday, but all eyes are already starting to shift to the start of the regular season. We're going to dive into a bit of history that is going to be made at Lumen Field in the season opener on September 8th. Plus, we'll be looking at which starters should sit and which ones should play against the Cleveland Browns, and some defensive players with the most to gain heading into this final audition of the preseason. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It may seem crazy. The Seahawks are going into their 48th season as an NFL franchise, and yet, Rob, they have never faced a rookie quarterback as a starter in the season opener in the previous 47 years. That streak is finally going to be snapped, though, on September 8th, with the Broncos announcing that former Oregon star and first-round pick Bo Nix will make the start for Denver in Week 1. Sean Payton entrusting him with their offense. So the Seahawks are going to get a chance to play against a rookie QB in Week 1 as a starter for the first time. And that definitely adds some intrigue already to a pretty intriguing matchup between two teams that are trying to get back to the postseason at Lumen Field.
Yeah, there's just so many interesting storylines with this, Corbin. I mean, obviously, the Seahawks and the Broncos are going to be excited about the kickoff to the NFL season. You mentioned the historic element of it, just the national geographic element of it, as far as the fact that Bo Nix did play originally at Auburn and, of course, transferred over to Oregon and had an unbelievable couple of seasons with the Ducks there, becoming a Heisman finalist, leaving Oregon as the most certainly one of the most celebrated quarterbacks, but also among the most experienced quarterbacks, really in college football history. He entered this huge draft class of quarterbacks. There were a record 6 that went in the first round, of course. None of them had more experience in the 61 games that Bo Nix started over his college career. And just to see the maturation that he has shown, throughout that entire process. We talked about that with Jim Nagy, a couple of months ago at this point. So really excited about the matchup that the Seahawks have here. Obviously, from a Seahawks perspective, I don't care how much experience that Bo Nix has against college defensive players and defensive coaches. Now Mike McDonald's going to have an opportunity to have basically the most ideal scenario possible. A rookie quarterback starting on the road in his NFL debut, the jitters are going to be huge. And I think that it sets up really well for the Seahawks, especially considering the fact that in Week 2, the Seahawks go on the road, of course, to Foxborough in New England, and they might be starting Drake May, who actually has the least amount of college football starts on his resume of those 6 quarterbacks that got drafted. So, Corbin, for so many different reasons, today is a big day in Seahawks history, just because of the fact that it really does look like there is an opportunity to get off on an early winning note for the Seahawks in the Mike McDonald era, but also because it's a fascinating one, just because of the fact that we're seeing young quarterbacks really seize their opportunities here in Denver and perhaps in New England.
Yeah, it really is a historic first week or two there, because obviously the Seahawks have never played a starting rookie quarterback in Week 1. They certainly haven't done it the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, based on the people that I've talked to today, I still think the chance of the Patriots having anybody not named Jacoby Brissett starting in that game, barring injury, it's pretty low. I don't think that Drake May, even with the comments that were made by Gerard Mayo, the new head coach today, I'm not anticipating that is going to be a team. They're going to be playing a rookie quarterback. Now, if that game was like Week 8 or Week 9, then I think there's a chance you could see Drake May at that point. I just think week 2 is probably a little early. In the case of Denver, though, Bo Nix, he has been kind of waiting in the weeds here throughout training camp. I've been watching a lot of different feeds from Denver Broncos reporters that have been hinting at he's coming, and ended up winning that starting job for week 1. So certainly a guy that's going to give the Seahawks some interesting things they have to deal with because he's a mobile quarterback. He can run the football, can do a lot of damage with his legs. Not necessarily a big-time deep ball thrower. Can he make those passes? Yes, but what is going to make him such an intriguing fit for Sean Payton's offense is how quickly he gets the football out of his hands, out of the pocket. And I think that was the one thing that really frustrated him working with Russell Wilson last year, the last couple of years. The fact that the Denver Broncos were not able to get that football out quickly. So those are some things that Mike Macdonald, his coaching staff, are going to have to worry about when we get to that point. But from a defensive standpoint, you should think that playing against rookie quarterbacks is going to be advantageous, especially early in the year. If you were drawing Bo Nix week 10 or later, when he's gotten some starts under his belt, that might not be a ideal situation for the Seahawks defense. But when you're playing a rookie quarterback in week 1, not to say that it's a gimme game, because Sean Payton's going to have his guys ready to play, and this is a talented offense. They've got some pieces for Bo Nix to throw the football to, but you're playing a rookie quarterback first regular season game. That is a different litmus test than what you're playing against preseason competition. So from that standpoint, you would think Leonard Williams and company, they're going to be licking their lips a little bit.
Well, they should be. And certainly I think the 12s have got to absolutely bring it and just put that much more pressure on the rookie quarterback. That said, I think that the Denver Broncos are, built pretty well to handle a rookie quarterback. And as I mentioned before with Bo Nix, 61 games starting. This is not your typical rookie quarterback. And you just articulated well a lot of Bo Nix's strengths. He does not have that absolute hose of an arm to be able to really go deep consistently. Now, he can throw the ball with touch. He can loft it up there. And he has as quick of a release of any of the quarterbacks that were just drafted in this class. And among the quicker releases that I've seen in my NFL evaluations, he's a very smart quarterback. And as you said, he's also a dual threat quarterback. And you mentioned that he does have some talented wide receivers. Courtland Sutton is the best one that they have. He's an absolute terrific player. He's also a player, though, that I think can be a little bit more of a possession type for them. I think that the ones that are going to be interesting is going to be the speedsters. Marvin Mims, former Seahawk Philip Dorsett, the Cleveland Browns, we're going to talk about a little bit later in the preseason game. Talk about a lot of former Seahawks on their roster. The Denver Broncos have some as well, and his former teammate at Oregon, Troy Franklin, who also was an absolute speedster. And Bo Nix gets the ball out of his hands very quickly. It's because he's got a sharp mental processor, and then he also it's almost like he's a shortstop or a second baseman turning two. He can just kind of dip down to sidearm, whip the ball out very, very quickly. Now, in Mike Macdonald's defense, because we anticipate that there's going to be some coverage adjustments and things like that. That's one of the things that we're excited about is just all the multitude of different creative kind of plays that Mike Macdonald has in store for Bo Nix. Bo Nix has the quick release and the speedy wide receivers, as well as two very talented tackles that I really think that make the Denver Broncos pretty spooky in that regard. So again, this is going to be a fascinating match. I can't wait to break it down when we get a little bit closer to the actual kickoff on September 8th.
Yeah, I feel like we're going into a matchup Wednesday here. I want to start diving into the key matchups that the Seahawks and the Broncos are going to have on September 8th. But listen, folks, we got a couple weeks till we're going to be getting the matchup Wednesday. I'm a little bit antsy to get that segment back. But for now, we do know the Seahawks are going to be having a bit of history at Lumen Field with the first starting rookie quarterback on the opposing team in 48 years as a franchise. When we come back before that season opener, there's still one more preseason game, the finale coming up at Lumen Field. We're going to be taking a look at which starters should play and which ones should stay on the sidelines as Seattle draws closer to the start of the regular season. We'll get to that coming up next year on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Bet on everything from Geno Smith's MVP odds to the rising chances of Byron Murphy II winning Defensive Rookie of the Year to Mike McDonald being Coach of the Year in his first year with the Seahawks. Just throw in a $5 bet, and you'll get a 3-week free trial to NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, here on our Wednesday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. For your second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get your daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Seahawks will soon be opening their regular season against the Denver Broncos at Lumen Field. But before Bo Nix gets that chance to make some history as the first rookie starting quarterback against Seattle, there's a preseason game left to play against the Cleveland Browns on Saturday night. And Rob, at least based on what the Cleveland Browns have said to this point, Kevin Stefanski is expecting to play some starters in this game. We anticipate that Mike McDonald is going to be playing some starters in this game as well. You don't have the joint practices like they did against Tennessee to make up for those reps. It feels like there's going to be a fair amount of run for the starters, at least for a few drives in this football game. And we were actually asked this question on the mailbag yesterday, and we decided, you know what? We didn't feel like we talked enough about this. Let's really dive into this right now and look at this preseason finale. You're seeing a lot of teams now that aren't playing starters throughout the entire preseason, but it's a little different when you have a first-time head coach. You've got new offensive and defensive coordinators, and you're trying to get ready for the start of the season. So I would hedge bets here that we are going to see at least 50% of the starters on offense, and I would say it's going to be close to 100% of the starters on defense, or at least going to get a few snaps in this football game.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I'm leaning as well, Corbin. And as you said, we got this question on our Tuesday mailbag. And, it was a question that honestly, after I thought about it a little bit more, I'm going to completely scrap what I said yesterday and change things. And I don't want to be somebody who does that very often, but I think you can make a very strong argument. And you just took some of the points or made some of those points as to why the Seahawks might start virtually everybody, including Geno Smith. Now, one, the Cleveland Browns and their head coach, Kevin Stefanski. Here's the actual quote, because there has been a little bit of wishy-washiness it's not just me, it's from the Cleveland Browns as well, as far as what they're going to be doing. So here's Stefanski's quote. It says, all of our starters should expect to play. Then we'll determine who does or doesn't, how many plays they do. Like I told you guys, meaning the media, in particular with Deshaun Watson, I want to take in all the information this week and really make a final determination later in the week. I expect that Mike McDonald is going to be basically doing the same thing. But as you said, Corbin, the Seahawks are implementing entirely new offensive and defense. This is their first home game of the Mike McDonald era, albeit in the preseason. But you got to generate some excitement in this city. I mean, right now, especially with the certain baseball team across the street struggling right now, this is your opportunity. And, the Seahawks and the Cleveland Browns had a classic a year ago where the, former Ohio State star Jackson Smith-Njigba, of course, caught the game-winning touchdown by Geno Smith to beat the Cleveland Browns. And one of in a game that featured the throwback jerseys, for crying out loud. I think that this is just an opportunity here for the Seahawks to start their stars, to flex a little bit against a quality Cleveland squad, offense and defense. Now, the risk, of course, is the injury possibilities. And there are some significant ones, because if Myles Garrett is starring his typical left defensive end spot and he's going up against George Fant or perhaps McClendon Curtis, then, oh my goodness, you might be biting down the ends of the fingernails here in this game. So it's a fascinating decision, one that I don't know that the Seahawks are really going to know for sure until basically as they're going through walkthroughs. But like you said, I think that there's a possibility that we're going to see at least half of the Seattle starters and quite possibly the entire starting lineup, just because of the respect that you have for the opponent in the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I think that is going to play a little bit of a part in this. If the Browns come out and they've got a bunch of their guys ready to roll, then you want to get as many of your starters in there to get quality reps. And I'm not saying play them an entire half. They're not going to be doing that. But as far as players that I think should play in this game, as I mentioned, I think offense, you can be a little bit more selective about which guys are going to be able to play in this game. But I think the entire offensive line, George Fant, Charles Cross at the tackle spots, see what you got in Lakin Tomlinson. Maybe Christian Haynes starts at left guard again if they decide to go that route. But you need to have a semblance of a starting offensive line that could be your week one line and get them at least one series together in this game, if not 2 or 3, to really get ready, lather them up a little bit, especially the guys up front for that week one game against the Denver Broncos. I think Jackson Smith and Jigba, it would make some sense to maybe play a little bit in this game. And then Jake Bobo and some of those other receivers. DK and Tyler, probably not, especially because Lockett's not been practicing for about 2 weeks. He's been very limited. I think they're going to hold those two out, but Jackson Smith and Jigba might get his opportunity in this game. And the tight ends, you're already without your top tight ends, your top 2. So you need to figure out what you've got in the tight ends that are there in the roster. So I would anticipate guys like Brady Russell are going to be getting a lot of those snaps early in the half. So really for me, the only positions that I think on offense, it doesn't make sense. Running back, keep those guys in bubble wrap. Ken Walker III, Zach Charbonnet just come back from an injury. You don't need to play those guys. They will be ready week one. George Halani and Kenny McIntosh can handle getting most of the carries and the snaps in this preseason game. And you, of course, have a couple other running backs in the roster that can play in the second half as well. But from a starting standpoint, you can play those second, third stringers. You don't need to play Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet in this game. And I think Geno, it really just boils down to, do you want to get him some reps against another scheme or not? And do you give him 1 or 2 series? How much is he pressing the coaching staff to do that? That's really the million-dollar question. To me, Geno Smith is the biggest coin flip in this offense as far as guys that could or could not play in this game.
Yeah, because as I mentioned before, just the possibility that Myles Garrett's out there, I think is something you have to take into consideration. Cleveland has a quality defensive line around him as well. A couple of former Seahawks. There's actually 6 former Seahawks that are on the Cleveland Browns roster. 2 of them, as I just mentioned, are defensive linemen, Shelby Harris and Quentin Jefferson. I mean, those are 2 cagey veterans. And so you're potentially going to be having them going up against Anthony Bradford, of course, is only in his second season. Christian Haynes is a rookie. Oluwatimi perhaps playing some significant minutes as well, even if it is Connor Williams, to your point before about starting the entire offensive line and really giving them an opportunity to gel. Again, there is going to potentially be some problems up front, even though this is a home game. So that to me is fascinating. I mentioned the fact that there were 6 former Seahawks. Just quickly, you have the Ethan Posick as the starting center. You have Nick Harris just traded back to Cleveland as the quote unquote backup center, and then you have Jermaine Ifedi, former first round selection, who's going to possibly be a starting right tackle for Cleveland, as well as Devin Bush, the linebacker position, to go along with those defensive linemen. So I mentioned all 6 of those players, Corbin, because it's just the most natural emotion in the world is to want a little bit of payback, and you're coming back to Lumen Field. Again, I think that it's going to be interesting to see if the Seahawks, we've seen the first 2 preseason games, the Seahawks have been the more physical team against 2 very physical squads. I've been impressed by that. Now, you're going to be at home. You have this audition in front of the home crowd. Again, I think that it is important for Seattle to match that physicality. And I think the easiest way of doing so is letting the ones go out there and kind of prove that this is their home stadium.
Yeah, and I think that really on the defensive side of the football, that's going to be the biggest thing. Is I think with this home crowd, Mike McDonald, you can't tell me that he's not itching a little bit to give the crowd something exciting on defense. Now he's going to be dishing out his entire playbook in the final preseason game. Still going to be a vanilla package, but at least for one series, hey, we're going to show you what this defensive line might look like with Byron Murphy and Jaron Reed and Leonard Williams, Chenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe. We're going to unleash the dogs. And then, maybe Tyrell Dodson doesn't look like Jerome Baker's going to be available for this game, but hey, we got Tyrese Knight who might start in week 1 at the way things are going right now. And then in the secondary, let's give Spoon a few reps. Let's give Reek Woolen a few reps, Julian Love a few reps. I mean, get the crowd excited about what's going to be coming in a couple of weeks when they actually are playing the real bullets flying, in the first week of the regular season. And so that's why I feel like, and look, injuries happen on both sides of the ball, but it feels like on defense, knock on wood, that you can usually play a few more guys in the preseason. You're not even worried about them getting tackled and having their knees get caved in or whatever. So it does seem like defenses tend to have a few more starters in general than what offense does in preseason games. So I would expect that we're going to see a lot of those guys, and that's going to make it exciting because you would at least get to see what those starters on defense look like, the ones on offense. If it's the offensive line, hey, I can really get a litmus test now for where this offensive line is at, especially if Myles Garrett is playing the other side. Let's figure out what we've got here in this offensive line, where we need to improve, move forward from there. But I would expect that we're going to probably see 60% of the starters on the two sides of the football. That's probably the prediction that I would make at this point, and that would be exciting considering the regular season's coming up. Give the fans Lumen Field debut for the season. Give them just a little bit of a taste about what they're going to be seeing when the regular season opens. Speaking of this preseason finale, we're going to continue breaking it down with defensive players with the most to gain. We did offense yesterday. We'll get to defense coming up next year on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to think about skipping a car payment when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Want to see the Seahawks in their home opener and Saturday's preseason finale at Lumen Field? You can get seats at the loudest venue in the NFL in the lower bowl for under $50. Great seats without breaking the budget to see some exciting young talent as the regular season approaches. Game Time has deals on tickets right at the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write in your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price. Guaranteed. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The preseason set to finish up on Saturday night. The Seahawks taking on the Browns. Expected to play some starters on both sides. We don't know which ones yet at this point. We kind of debated and discussed that a little bit in the last segment, but until we actually get to the game, we don't know which specific starters are going to suit up. With that being said, this feels like, again, it's a preseason game. This feels like a game that's going to be most important for those guys that are battling for starting jobs or they're battling for roster spots. And so let's talk about the defensive players, Rob, that have the most to gain going into this game. And I know along the defensive line, there's one player in particular who's coming off of a solid second preseason game that you still feel like needs to have one more really solid outing to ensure that he's on this roster.
Yeah, Myles Adams definitely needs to do that. He is a guy that, he's still 26 years old. And we have marveled about his just an incredible combination of power and quickness for a guy who's got kind of a stubby 6'2", 290 pounds. At least that's what they list him at for his frame. At the same time, as I mentioned, over those 23 games, Corbin, he's got a total of 2 tackles for loss and 1 sack. And you're now in 3 years now he's been in the NFL. And you get to the point where you're starting to wonder, is this guy going to take the next step, or is he a quote unquote just a practice squad player? That to me is going to a little bit be the theme of the group of 4 players I'm going to highlight here, Corbin. Myles Adams, as I mentioned, did start 1 game so far for the Seahawks. Every one of the players I'm going to mention here has started at least 1 game for the Seahawks. That said, like Myles Adams, I think that Darrell Taylor, I think that Marquise Blair, and I think that cornerback Mike Jackson are all former starters who might be on their way out of making this roster at all. And perhaps because of their age or because of just numbers at the position, may not be the strongest candidates for Seattle 16-man practice squad either. So that's the biggest argument I'm going to make again for Myles Adams, Darrell Taylor, Marquise Blair, and Mike Jackson, why they are 4 players that have as much as anyone on the line in this matchup against the Cleveland Browns, just because, again, I think that there is a possibility that each of these four players makes the starting 53. And I think that there certainly is a possibility that they could be candidates for Seattle's practice squad. But I also believe that all four of them have demonstrated enough during this training camp and certainly in the past to justify some other NFL team putting them on their 53-man roster. So again, I mentioned with Miles Adams, and I personally think that he is going to make Seattle's roster. I think that the versatility he provides Seattle up front along with defensive line is just something that nobody else really can match on their squad, with the exception, of course, of Byron Murphy, and that's your first-round selection. From a size speed perspective, he is as close to a second version of Byron Murphy II as you're going to get. So he makes some sense. Darrell Taylor, to me, is the fascinating one. He's 27 years old. He's due $3.13 million this year, but only has a $20,000 dead cap hit, if that might be the case. And there's a lot of people who have been as frustrated with Darrell Taylor as perhaps anybody in the recent Seahawks history. But at the same time, 21 and a half career sacks is almost double what Uchenna Nwosu Boye Mafe have, or anybody else on Seattle's defensive line, at least what they've done in Seattle. And so before you just say, oh, just cut Darrell Taylor, then again, you have to acknowledge his ability as a pass rusher. And we've talked a lot about Mike Jackson and Marquise Blair before, their physicality, their size, the fact that they're both still 27 years old and only do roughly $1 million this year. But again, just the numbers. We talked about corner and safety are very deep positions for the Seahawks. Again, I think that all four of those players, if they're not remaining with Seattle, then there's going to be a lot of other NFL teams out there going to be very interested in these four players.
I'm going to be looking at fringe guys here too, and I'm going to start at the linebacker spot. Patrick O'Connell, I just think, has had a really sound training camp. He was good in OTAs, mandatory minicamp. He's mostly been good in the preseason. He's had a couple of untimely penalties, but you can see the coverage instincts. I think that's maybe the thing I'm most impressed with, is how he drops in coverage and he's able to get back into his zone drops. And he just looks natural doing that. He's a really solid blitzer. But it feels like right now, with Tyrese Knight starting to emerge a little bit, John Radigan kind of now being that wily old veteran, if Jerome Baker's not healthy, you need to keep Patrick O'Connell anyway for the start of the season. But he really needs to solidify his standing here. And he's supposed to be a core special teams guy too. Can you prove that in this game as well, going down and making some plays on special teams, on kick and punt coverage? So Patrick O'Connell is a player that I'm watching very closely. And then in the secondary, the cornerback positions, I'm looking at a pair of former Auburn Tigers in Nehemiah Pritchett and DJ James, who I don't think either one of these guys right now is a lock to make this football team. And I know that there's going to be some of our listeners saying, but they were draft picks. So what? We have seen late round draft picks like Nehemiah Pritchett and DJ James not make the roster initially and come back on the practice squad. This happens quite a bit in the NFL. So these two players, particularly DJ James, he had such a rough second preseason game, and it's just one game, but you haven't seen him really jump out. There's been a few plays in training camp, but he has had his struggles in training camp on the practice field as well. You've already got a player in Artie Burns that you trust at that nickel spot when Devin Witherspoon's not playing it. Kobe Bryant can still play there in a pinch. So, is there a spot for him right now? Can he find a way to bounce back in front of the home crowd and have a really good game and then maybe get himself back on the right side of the bubble? And then Nehemiah Pritchett hasn't had a bad preseason, but hasn't necessarily done anything great either. Can you make a splashy play or two? Get your hands on a pass breakup, get a pick. Can you do something on special teams? Maybe he gets a chance to return a kickoff in this game. We don't know where that is going as far as special teams goes, but both of these players to me are still very much on the bubble. In particular, DJ James, I've got him on the wrong side of the bubble right now. If he wants to have any chance to make this football team, he's going to have to bounce back and show that he can be resilient after a really rough preseason game in every facet. And Pritchett just needs to be able to get his hands on the football somehow and just show that he's making strides. He's been solid, not spectacular. Both those guys are trying to make a really deep cornerback group. And then the safety spot, a player that you've talked about on early episodes this week, Ty Okada, is coming off that big game in Tennessee. He's gotten under the skin of his teammates. He's gotten under the skin of Titans players at joint practice last week. And Ty Okada's just kind of got that chip on his shoulder. He fits what Mike McDonald's looking for in that secondary, and yet he is still very much far from being a lock to make this football team either. He needs to go out and continue playing at a high level, make some big tackles, get his hands on the football. He had the diving pick off the deflection the other day. He's done a lot of things to help himself, make a few plays on special teams, try to continue to force the issue for the Seahawks coaching staff that, hey, we can't keep Ty Okada off this roster because he's making plays on defense. He's making plays on special teams. His teammates, yeah, he gets under their skin, but they love him because of it. And he just fits the mentality that we are trying to build here under Coach Mike McDonald. So Ty Okada, to me, maybe as much as any player on this defense going into this game, I think he may have a roster spot riding on the way that he performs in this game and what he's able to do for an encore after playing really well in Tennessee for the most part last week. So Okada, he definitely is on this list of guys that I think could gain a roster spot with a really strong performance. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, I'll be riding solo. Going to be really ramping things up for Saturday's preseason finale, taking a look at some key players to watch and who to watch on the Browns as well. Some old familiar faces that are going to be coming back to Lumen Field. We'll dive into that in tomorrow's show. Make sure that you are listening in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.